Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mind Matters, empowering conversations for public safety professionals, where we'll discuss topics involving wellness and first responders. Join me on this journey of learning from subject matter experts in their various fields of psychology, medicine, leadership, and many more. You can find our show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Let's get into the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Morris. Good morning and welcome back to Mind Matters, where we explore conversations that shape the health, the readiness, and resilience of our public safety professionals. I'm your host, Elizabeth Morris, and of course, my co-host is joining us again today, Gary Fly. And today's episode is one we're really excited about because we're diving into a topic that sits at the center of hiring in public safety, and that's looking at the psychological evaluations and what psychological suitability means. So in terms that's often used, but not always fully understood, the psych suitability. So today we're going to break down what it means, go into some things, what factors help determine suitability and why it matters so much. Also, hopefully cover the reoccurring questions that we get from agencies. So, and joining us for this conversation is someone who has been part of the FMRT group since the beginning. So he works in this space and has seen thousands and thousands of evaluations or completed thousands of evaluations and no stranger to Mind Matters. So, and that's FMRT's lead psychologist, Dr. Peter Schulz. So thanks again for carving some time out for us again, Dr. Schulz. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love to do this.
Good. So, let's start kind of at a high level. When we talk about psychological suitability and the definition based on IACP, that's International Association of Chiefs of Police Psych Services section guidelines, it's the minimum requirements that an applicant is free from any emotional or mental condition that might adversely affect the performance of safety-based duties and responsibilities and capable of withstanding the psychological demands inherent in the prospective position. Can you break that down to us, what that means to you, Dr. Schulz, and keeping in mind that we have an audience that are most likely lay folks that are not doctoral level clinicians like yourself?
I would break it down further as we're looking for both the qualifiers from a psychological perspective. So those are the things you have to have, the qualifiers that you need, and also the disqualifiers that would keep you from doing it. So you may have all the gumption in the world to want to be a police officer. I'm going to help and serve and protect and rah, rah, rah. But if you got some anger issues, if you've got some substance abuse issues, if you've got some unresolved mental health issues, if you lack the resiliency, if you got some factors that are weighing against you, all the desire in the world is not going to help you be able to succeed at this job. At the same time, we're also looking for, do you have the stuff? And historically, it was called, you need a calling. You hear that term a lot within this profession, and I love that word. We're looking for elements like, do you have the necessary IQ? You're dealing with the legal system. There's a lot of stuff you need to be able to know, and some of the stuff is pretty complex. You need to be able to work with assistant DAs and AUSAs and bringing a case to trial. You need to understand the rights of citizens when you implement the law. One of the major things we look for, do you have conscientiousness? So again, you may have the gumption, but do you have the actual stick-to-itiveness of being able to show up on time and complete tasks and have that responsibility and be trustworthy and have the integrity? So that's kind of a quick overview. I'm sure we'll break that down further, but we're looking for both the things you need to have and as well as the things you should not be having that will hinder you from being successful. And that's overarching understanding of psychological suitability.
Great. Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this as we prepared for the podcast, and I am a layperson, as you know, Dr. Schulz, and so I don't necessarily understand the real technical aspects of what you're doing and the why. But as we have prepared for this, Elizabeth actually had the opportunity to speak to a group of attorneys and talk about risk mitigation and maybe how things are misunderstood sometimes, or tools are misapplied, or even findings are misinterpreted and what they mean and what they're telling us. I'm curious, if you think about it from a risk sort of mitigation point of view for these agencies, What does that conjure up for you, or what would you suggest that these agencies be mindful of as they think about these different tools and applications that we provide?
Yeah, we do obviously it's a psychological evaluation, so we're going to do some psychological testing. So we're tapping into what's your personality makeup? Do you have the right personality to withstand working night shift, to showing up to suicides, to showing up to assaults, to getting yelled at, to getting underpaid, to getting misportrayed in the media, on and on and on and on. It's not a law enforcement, and we're talking about public safety as a whole, but I'll just sort of pinpoint law enforcement. It's a rather thankless job. Not a lot of people say, thank you for showing up to my door with handcuffs. So you don't get a lot of warm fuzzies from it a lot. And so you need that ability to be able to stick it out. But then back to more other risks, we deal a lot with people who look for things of like substance abuse history. And a lot of folks would say, yeah, hey, 5 years ago, I went through an episode, got heavy drinking. I'm over it now. And we'll say, great, awesome. Let's dig a whole lot deeper into that because of 5 years ago, you were drinking because you were in a breakup of a relationship. And now life is going pretty good for you. That's good. I want some hardcore evidence that that is not going to resurface again when you get back into law enforcement and you go through another bad relationship, or you get stuck on working night shift and your significant other, that marital strain starts happening because you're not there at night and you're not going to your son's Little League baseball games and you're working lots of overtime shifts to make enough money, which means you're missing Christmases and so on and so forth. So your relationships are going to be strained. So I'm looking for, okay, you're telling me you're not drinking now, which is great. Awesome. Keep it up. What's the likelihood this is going to resurface again? What's the risk factors? So we're not just looking for do or do you not drink? How do you check the boxes on this little checklist? What's the evidence behind this of this risk surfacing? And as you can sort of prognosticate ahead forward in law enforcement, the last thing you want is someone who, again, starts off great in the career, hits a nut, hits a streak, and then next thing you know, you get an officer who's getting arrested for DDoS. Or you're having to respond to their home because they got drunk at home and some domestic violence started happening and that ball starts rolling. And again, you've got an officer who should be role modeling the law and now they're breaking the law. And that all could have been prevented had you done your due diligence back at step one of doing a very thorough psychological evaluation to kind of rule these kinds of things out. And you can apply that to PTSD, depression, mismanagement of finances. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of all the risk factors that we're looking at. And again, it's what's your history of this, but what's your current right now? What do you have in place to give us assurance that this isn't going to resurface again? Because when you get into law enforcement, it's going to get hard. You're working tough schedules. You're responding to a lot of crisis. You're going to get really, really challenged. And we want to make sure when that challenge comes, do you have the resources necessary to be able to manage this?
Yeah, and those stressors, for again, all of our public safety, the telecommunicators who, speaking of getting yelled at, and firefighters who are still showing up at those scenes with their counterparts. And it's risk for the agency because in this role, you are the evaluator and providing a work related evaluation on behalf of the agency. But then it's also risk, I think, to the person. And if anything, hearing you talk about that, it is an opportunity for, even though the person is being evaluated, for them to talk through with you like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a stressful job. And what are some coping skills? So while you're not in a treatment component, you are getting them thinking about the risk to them personally, which I think is needed. So when we talk about psychological evaluations, and this comes up sometimes, questions from agencies, people assume that it's about diagnosing a mental condition. So how does a psychological evaluation, when you're assessing psychological suitability for these types of work-related evals, differ from a general mental health or clinical diagnosis like an independent medical evaluation?
Yeah, very important. If you're thinking straight, just mental health field, you're sort of getting your cues from the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, or the Bible of all things mental health. And if you meet this criteria, you would technically have a mental health disorder, and that qualifies you for insurance and blah, 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 blah. We're not looking for whether you meet a diagnosis or not. Our entire driving factor is, can you do the job? Is there anything that's going on that's keeping you from getting the job done? And we may have some people who do not qualify for mental health disorder, but are still disqualified because they've got underlying anger issues, they've got IQ issues, they've got a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't necessarily fall under the umbrella of, well, you have a mental disorder. On the same side, and this rather shocks a lot of people, you can have a mental health disorder, but it's being properly addressed. You're in treatment, on medication, you have all the resources in the world, and this is getting addressed to the point where it's not going to impair your ability to do the job. I have so many people who come in the door and they're absolutely terrified to tell me, Doc, I'm on a little medication for depression. Am I automatically disqualified? And they're terrified that if they go on record saying, yeah, I take some Lexapro or something of that they're automatically. And it's like, no, no, no. It's almost sort of the opposite. Think of like high blood pressure. If you're on high blood pressure medication, I want you to take your medication. Much rather you be a healthy person and not get high blood pressure and have a stroke and be disqualified. Same thing with you have an underlying anxiety or depression. If that's untreated, that's a big problem. But if you recognize you have it and you go get some help for it and you're working with a mental health professional and you're on some medication and it's being properly managed, that actually keeps you healthier. Much rather you take that medication and show up to work in a good frame of mind and be able to handle this and have the resiliency versus, well, let me stop taking my medication so that I can qualify for the job. And before you know it, you're very stressed out, you're depressed, and you're miserable, and you're doing a poor job at work. It actually sort of almost doesn't, it's not an automatic strike against you, but it's something we're going to very thoroughly research. We're going to have a very long talk about it. I'm going to talk to your treatment provider. We're going to get some type of documentation or records to make sure we're getting the whole story. And then we're going to look ahead. And I'm going to give you all kinds of scenarios of if you have a mild depression or anxiety, how are you going to handle these 10 different scenarios with that in mind? And how are you going to utilize proper self-care so that this doesn't continue to get out of hand?
Well, I
And
think that's go
I even tell people, you'd be surprised how many chiefs of police are on medication. I've done
ahead.
about 80 chiefs of police, and it's refreshing to me to have them be honest and say, boy, I wish when I first started in this profession, it was okay to talk to a therapist. It was okay to take some medication. I would have been a so much better police officer, but things have changed, and now and I'm a much better person. I'm a better father. I'm a better husband. I'm a better everything on this medication. And so they can sort of emulate that to their department of saying, hey, get some mental health
Mhm.
treatment. We want to stand with you for the longevity of your
And manage that stress better. I do say that a lot because it comes up, and so I guess it's important to note, yes, someone may have a diagnosis, right? And you are going to do your due diligence to, yes, discuss that and also get the records and have those collateral interviews if necessary. But when people come to me and say, yeah, I'm like, I have a PTSD diagnosis, like I'm going to fail my psych, which we should probably address that. And for those listening, I did, quotation marks failing. It and I said, no, if anything, they'd rather know that you're on medication and that you are
Mhm.
getting help and you do have a therapist than the opposite, than someone closed off, shut down, and clearly not managing the stressors that are going to come with this career.
Right. I like to emphasize there's have and there's had. You may have had PTSD when you got back from Afghanistan and you did not like stopping at a stop sign. You were hyper conscientious of stuff on the side of the road and you could not go to fireworks and you had all the classic. We expect to see that. We went through some very traumatic stuff overseas. It took a while to acclimate when you got back to the United States. But that does not mean you have PTSD now. The symptoms are not as severe. They're not there. And so even though it may still be in your paperwork and you may still get a VA disability rating for it and get a check, and hey, our country is indebted to you for your service. And we're not going to hold that against you. We're not going to discriminate against you because you've served our country and it took a toll on you. But that does not mean you actively have PTSD. And we're going to make that big differentiation there.
And I think that's important to speak to as well, where for years, people would say, well, this person has a high VA, a PTSD rating, a VA rate. How are they psychologically suitable? And where, and please speak further on this, but I say, well, our psychologists are assessing them now. Where are they now, as opposed to, and again, keeping in mind, and we've heard this, sometimes the ratings are handed out like candy, and it's different types of evaluators ranging from social workers to psychological associates, master's level to doctoral level. So that baseline kind of changes. And so am I speaking correctly to them when I say that, our evaluators are looking at the person at this time and assessing that PTSD or whatever the issue is?
Absolutely. And we're also making sure that they're not hiding something. So we're going to get those records because
Mhm.
lots of times we'll say, hey, I mean, when things were at their worst, did you ever start going down or having suicidal thoughts, not wanting to be here, domestic violence with your spouse? And sadly, some of them will sweep that under the rug because they don't want to admit to that. And then we get the records and say, okay, it is in here that you did have suicidal thoughts. Now we've got a much severe issue. And two, you just lied to me face to face. And one of my biggest things is don't lie to me. If you're going
Right.
to lie to get the job, you're going to lie on the job. And that's a
Mhm.
huge integrity issue. Another thing with that is it's very contextual to the position. So if, a lot of folks with PTSD don't like being in tight, crowded, surrounded places because they got to watch their back. They're always watching hands. They can't handle loud noises. You might be able to handle that as a probation officer on the street. Probably can't handle that if you're a detention officer in a locked detention facility and you're surrounded by 800 people who are criminals, who are dangerous, you better watch your back and you better watch their hands because this is who they are. So it's the degree of current symptoms, but also the context of what kind of position you may or may not be going into. So if you come to us for probation, we may say, okay, given the job, this is a good fit. Given the detention officer, where you might be in a maximum security facility, no,
Yeah.
this is not a good fit. You are going to have a resurgence of your symptoms. This is bad for you. This is bad for the inmates. This is bad for the department. It's bad for society. And we're doing you a favor by saying, don't do this.
Right. While probation and parole, they're out visiting, they're going to homes. Again, same with our law enforcement, our firefighters. But yeah, being in a detention facility would definitely change the dynamics there. Gary, do you have any thoughts
Yeah,
at this point?
couple of things that are really starting to come out. One is, that this is not a static thing, right? The has versus have or had, that's an interesting concept. And I think people maybe don't understand that, hey, you're looking at the person today in real terms against a very specific opportunity that you're applying for, which is also a nuance that I wonder if people get this idea that you actually want to understand treatments that they may be under and you want this candor around life experiences and how they've dealt with it, right? Because this is not pass fail. It is an understanding of, is this person capable of doing this job right now? And then think about, if these are some of the misconceptions out there on the candidate side and probably on the agency side, are there other things that we would like for people to know that are maybe misconceptions about what's happening, the intent behind this idea that, okay, it's not static and it's for a particular job, therefore it might not make sense for them to be in job A, but job B or agency C could be a good fit, right? I think you're bubbling up some really interesting ideas that maybe the layperson doesn't really understand. And it's often the layperson that's trying to interpret these results.
Mhm. I think that kind of speaks a little bit to where you alluded to it, Gary, where someone may be found not psychologically suitable at this time for, agency A, and then they are reevaluated at a later date, typically 6 months to a year after, but sometimes, sooner for another agency and may be found suitable. There's a lot of confusion that lies with that, and again, it goes back to that it's not static. Dr. Schultz, what are some kinda key things that you can share about that? This applicant was seen at 2 different places, 2 different findings. Why?
When it goes to the position, like I said, very different whether you're, a telecommunicator who's you're within police headquarters, you're nice and safe versus you're in a detention center surrounded by dangerous inmates. So the context of the position applies. Also, between evaluation one and evaluation two, you may have actually got some help. You may have addressed issues. I have brought up some very serious stuff to you, like people with histories of sexual assaults. You'd be surprised how many people have never talked about that. They've never even disclosed to their spouse that they were sexually abused when you're young. That's not going to fly with us. I'm going to ask you some very pointed questions, and we're going to get to it. And if I sense for half a second you're dodging it, I'm going to zero in on that, and you're talking. And by bringing that up, and maybe in evaluation one, you try and tell me, hey, it happened, but I'm over it. Forgive and forget. I don't ever think about it. And I say, baloney. I'm going to ask you a bunch of very pointed questions. It's going to bring a lot of that stuff up. And you're going to start to realize, you're going to tear up. You're going to realize this is hard for me to talk about. And I'm going to point out to you, if you're going to be a police officer and you can't even discuss this, how are you going to sit down with that 10-year-old little girl who just got raped and get them to comfortably talk about it if you can't even talk about it yourself? You need to be able to be fluid with this and discuss this and be open about it. And this sort of the light goes on of, yeah, you're right, doc. I never really thought about it. And so they may go get some treatment and they may work through that. And so when they come back to round two, they're just a totally different person. Or they sort of, the light bulb went off that, yeah, I need some help for this, or their alcohol issue, or the PTSD issue, or ADHD is another one, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. They say, hey, yeah, when I was a kid, yeah, I bounced around a lot and I needed some medication, but I'm fine now. And I'll say, okay, well, back when you were young, you were in a academic classroom environment that highlighted the fact that you don't hold still, that you don't pay attention to teacher. You're looking out the window and everything else. You're not working at a landscaping job. How often does the fact that you don't pay attention really come to light? There's nothing forcing you to have to focus on something. Going back into law enforcement, you're going to have to go through BLET. You're looking about 4 or 5, sometimes 6 months of classroom. You've got 2 tests to take every single week. You've got to take notes. You've got a lot of note taking. One of the biggest things I hear from law enforcement is, oh my goodness, I had no idea how much documentation I got to do. And it's a lot. And if you're not good at keeping track of details and all these notes, when you're going to write up a report, they're going to look like crud because you didn't pay attention to all those little details. Did I interview Susie or Sally? What was her name? All these stuff you've got to be able to pay attention to. And so round one, I'll point that out, and then they kind of see the light and they go, yeah, I may have to circle back to my doctor and take a look. Do I still have it? Because my testing is showing that you have it. And I'll point it out to you in the interview. You can't remember stuff I told you 10 minutes ago. How are you going to remember stuff when you show up on scene and 45 minutes later, you got to write a detailed report on it? And so sometimes I'll go back and see their doctor, get on some medication. They come back to us to round two and they're a totally different person.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different variables at play as to why, all right, round one, you were not suitable. Round two at another department, you are suitable because we addressed some things and you took them to heart and got changed. And two, we called you out on some lies. And now you're coming to us and like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be totally honest this time. And we're still going to hold the fact against you. You lied in round one, so you don't get a free pass on that. We're still going to call you out on that, but okay. Look me straight in the eye and answer every my questions and don't dodge anything.
And I think that was the case. I was trying to find, there was a recent situation where it was actually same position, different agencies, not suitable, then suitable in a shorter time period. That definitely hit in my brain to remind me that I think it was that. I think that she was not forthcoming about certain instances in her life and her history, treatment, can't remember. Then fast forward, another agency, and I think that's when she was more forthcoming with you. But those are the types of questions I get. And another one is really like, what are kind of the top 5 reasons for someone being found not psychologically suitable? I mean, how many thousands have you completed? I think
somewhere in the ballpark of about 11,000 pre-employments with FMRT. So
yeah.
That's not counting all my private practice stuff.
Right. So in your 11,000 pre-employment evaluations, that's not even including fit for duty and other special teams and that sort of thing. What are really your top 5 for finding someone not psychologically suitable?
I'd say the number one up top of the list is integrity. Don't lie to me. All right. Yeah. If you got some stuff in your past, look me square in the eye and tell me you got some stuff in your past. Don't sweep it under the rug. Don't tell me half the story. Don't deny it. I'm going to find out, most likely. I'm not perfect, but we're probably going to stick our nose and find out some details. So integrity, again, as I said earlier, if you lie to me to get the job, you're going to lie on the job. You're going to be that officer who, it could be something as minor as you back up your patrol car and you bump into a pole and there's a little scratch. I need to know you're going to walk into the sergeant and say, sorry, yeah, it was me. It was kind of stupid. I put a little dent in the car. I'm probably going to get in trouble for it. Versus say, I have no idea how that dent got there. And now they're going to have to talk to the other officers. All right, who put the dent in the car? They're going to start an internal affairs investigation. They're going to have to pull cameras and this big, huge deal over nothing. Own up and admit you made a mistake. So integrity is probably the number one thing. I said the number two thing is substance use. Again, if you look at our fitness for duty evaluations, a lot of them have an alcohol component to it.
Yep,
Yeah,
you're right.
they're drinking because they can't sleep at night because they're working crazy shifts, and it's just sort of something to knock me out to take the edge off. Or they're having some really traumatic nightmares about stuff, and they're just having the need to forget about stuff, or they just don't know how to unwind. They just go call to call to call to call to call to call to call, and come home and like they don't know how to just stop. And alcohol becomes a thing. It also just becomes a social thing. Hey, it's sort of a hey, how much liquor can you handle? Sort of becomes sort of the macho thing, and unfortunately, they get into that crowd. So alcohol can get into a lot of trouble. I'd say the number three thing is just mental health. Again, a lot of folks said they had something in the past, but again, they're not in a situation where they're going to calls where they're suicides. They're not interviewing little kids who've been raped. They're not having to show up to a parent's home and do a death notification that their teenage daughter is never coming home because of some horrible accident that happened. They're not facing a life of trauma and tragedy when they're working at Amazon's, warehouse packaging. Now they're shifting into law enforcement, and now all this stuff is going to be hitting them, and that sort of underlying mental health issue that they had is really going to get taxed and really going to come to the surface. And while they may not be overly symptomatic at the moment, I can tell you once they face the hardships of law enforcement or firefighting or EMT or everything else, it's going to come to the surface. Those are kind of like the big three.
Mhm. And again, are they managing it, right? So I think, mental health, well, recognizing that, but are they managing it or just pretending like it doesn't exist? And kind of around that, I don't know. I mean, I think anecdotally, it's like 1 in 7 we would need to obtain records of some sort, whether it's treatment or medication or hospitalization. But, I think now with the candidates that come through, I mean, it's almost every one, right? I mean, we're having to and an uptick right in hospitalization or no? Are you seeing
Yes.
continuing to see more of those with the involuntary and voluntary from these younger applicants?
I would say since COVID,
Mhm.
COVID did a number to our society. We can have an hour-long discussion on
Right.
theology of all that. But
Mhm.
in terms of mental health, it is amazing how many people have had to sought out mental health treatment just due to the dynamics of the pandemic. And especially the younger age folks that we're seeing it now, developmentally, they missed out on some key developmental stuff, not going to school and being in class and having to learn over a laptop. And their entire generation is now look at a cell phone and there's not that interpersonal skills of development. And so a lot of mental health issues are coming out of that. And sort of with that, I happen to review all the not suitable reports that go out from FMRT, so I have a pretty good pulse on this. And I would say up till COVID, we saw about two applicants with suicidal history in the past. And that was pretty every year, two, 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 two. COVID on, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, it jumped up to 20 a year. It's now hitting about 40 a year.
Wow.
There's a
Okay.
lot of people who have had suicide attempts, or maybe they didn't attempt, but they seriously talked about and had to go to psychiatric hospital because they were this close to doing it. So things have changed. So there's a lot more folks with more mental health issues and a lot more severe mental health issues that they're
Mhm.
on record with. And again, they're coming in wanting to be police officers. And we got to go, whoa, this is before we give you a badge and a gun. I need to really, really know where we stand with this whole issue of suicide. And that's a huge, huge, huge concern that we have. So,
Yeah, and Gary, maybe it's because we met with, a woman not too long ago that's a telecommunicator, a manager. I mean, I just not knowing and how that feeds into, the anxiety and hearing, these things, over the phone and not knowing kind of like the ending. Yeah, I mean, I think the hospitalization, yeah, we've definitely seen more of that, and I think it's a great reminder to those that are listening. It's like we have to spend the time, and you as doctoral level professionals and evaluators are doing your due diligence, and it isn't a check the box process. Now,
not
some
at all.
agencies and I get it, it's budget, right? And that's talking about a whole nother conversation, why in our state, in our country, there's not more funding for these types of not only the psychological evaluations, but the mental health, being proactive and trying to prevent some of these fit for duties while there are budgets, for the tactical gear and things like that. But yeah, that's going a little bit sideways. But I mean, I think it's just a good reminder that it takes time. We're getting records that are sometimes 700 pages long that we're sending to you and saying, all right, and you've already done pre-work, looking at the assessment data and looking at, both the qualitative from our pre-background tool and the quantitative from the personality assessments, and then, the time with the person, then, getting those records, which, as we're saying, most people have them, and then writing a report that is legally defensible. I think it's imperative that we remind people of that, remind our leaders and people that are deciding on these budgets that it's much more than check the box.
Yeah,
That's my little soapbox, Gary.
Well, yeah, I actually, and I know we're getting close to the end, and I don't really think there's a question in here for you, Dr. Schulz, but it's maybe an observation to play off of all this. And we hear at times agency leaders say, "I wouldn't do this if it wasn't mandated," or some
Yeah.
sentiment like that, right? And oftentimes that's followed up by, because people don't understand. They don't understand the nuances of the role. They don't understand what it's like to be whatever, a police officer, a telecommuter, or whatever. And what you said, and a thread you brought through this whole discussion, to me shows the real importance of finding professionals that do understand. You started by talking about a new recruit or somebody having to go through BLET, and they're going to face 6 months of classroom time. They're going to do 2 tests a week. Oh, they're going to be called to a suicide, and they're going to have to see that, or going to be talking to an 11-year-old who went through some sort of really unfortunate trauma. That there's differences in roles. A guard in a prison is much different than a probation officer out on the street. And then those suicide stats that you all are cognizant of the 10x or 20x change in that. So to me, what you did, maybe even unintentionally, but is you pulled this thread all the way through. Here's how we think. Here's how we take all the data points and put it into a pattern and understand what is that data trying to tell us. And we do that for that job, that agency, that very specific opportunity. And so, again, I don't think there's a question there, but to me, it's the recognition that, oh my goodness, there are professionals out here designed and equipped to really help these public safety agencies make great hiring decisions, ensure they're protecting the communities that they're charged with protecting, and mitigating the risk both on the agency side and the community side.
Mhm.
Again, that's a little bit of a soapbox as well, but it just struck me as I was listening to this.
I
No,
would
I
say
love
to,
that
to
pull.
piggyback on what Elizabeth said, I mean, I'm an expert in this field, and I can tell you, if you're a department and all you're doing is just a quickie, if you're just administering a psychological test or two, and you've got a local, psychologist in town who's doing a 10-minute interview to see if they do or do not have mental health, you're going to miss 90% of the stuff we just talked about. I know those tests inside and out. Those tests cannot give you this level of information. They cannot prognosticate ahead and tell you whether this person has the capacity to do this job. And you're taking a huge, huge risk. And I like to remind folks, that applicant that we're reviewing today, if they happen to squeak in and they get hired and they're not that good, 2, 3 years from now, that's going to be your FTO. 5 years from now, that's going to be your sergeant.
Right.
10 years from now, it's going to be your lieutenant or captain. This person's rising in rank and they're setting the role model for the officers to follow. Do you really want someone who's not that good, showing the officers on them how to do the job? You're
Yeah.
taking a huge risk, huge,
I
huge.
think that's a great final thought. And it's one of those things. I mean, this is an ongoing conversation. I do want to continue it with you because there are things that come up that I even challenge the psychologists. Gary and I hear a lot of times it's like this resiliency piece. We need to know, are they resilient? Are they going to be able to take critical feedback? So maybe we need to have a round 3 of, you'll just be a regular guest, Dr. Scholes, of
Okay.
really like how to assess resiliency.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this has been a valuable conversation. I look forward to sharing it with our agencies and hopefully getting them to follow up with us to say, well, I have follow up questions, right? Like, can he tell me more about this? But yeah, psychological suitability. I mean, it's it's better to know than to not know, right? At the end of the day, you can't say, well, I just didn't know. But I just thank you for well, I thank you for being you. I thank you for your level of detail and care and being a part of our organization, of course. But I just really appreciate your time and insight. And yeah, so for our listeners, thanks for joining us. We hope you found the episode helpful and be sure to share it with others, other agencies. And yeah, stay tuned for more conversations focused on supporting our public safety from hire to retire. So y'all stay safe and we'll talk soon. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Mind Matters. Please give us your thoughts, and if you like this episode, feel free to share it with others. You can also find more content and choose to follow us on our Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at the FMRT Group. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Mind Matters.